Children on Australian Story, then Universe with Brian Cox, Media Watch and later The Detectives.
Tonight, warnings of disaster ignored at St Basils aged care home, where 50 residents died during Victoria's second COVID lockdown.
I wanted the true story told about what happened at St Basils, what happened to our loved ones.
Also tonight, protests continue as the state government prepares to make changes to its proposed pandemic powers. Fresh clues in the search for the remains of William Tyrrell. And Australia claims its maiden men's T20 World Cup in style. Good evening, Mary Gearin with ABC News. Warnings from senior doctors ignored. A lack of cooperation between state and federal health departments, and more disturbing details of neglect. The first day of the coronial inquest into Australia's deadliest aged care outbreak at St Basils in Melbourne has heard some grim evidence. 50 people died at the Faulkner nursing home last year, 45 from COVID. The inquest has heard Victorian and federal health officials signed off on furloughing all St Basils staff despite dire predictions of tragedy, and that conditions were so horrific, at one point a dead body was wheeled out in front of other residents. This story from court reporter Danny Tran.
Loving, kind and full of life, Christine Golding today described her mother Effie as the jackpot she and her brother were born winning. But when COVID-19 seeped into St Basils' home for the aged during last year's deadly second wave, the 84-year-old's life was cut short.
I wanted the true story told about what happened at St Basils, what happened to our loved ones.
Today, horrifying new details were aired about the conditions her mother faced in her final weeks. With 40 residents and 19 staff already infected, bins were overflowing, the healthy were mingling with the infected, and medication was on the floor.
A deceased patient was wheeled out without any attempt to clear the corridor of people.
50 died, all are being investigated by the coroner.
In memory and recognition of each of the deceased persons, we will read each name.
The outbreak was sparked by Victoria's bungled hotel quarantine scheme, and as the crisis deepened in July last year, Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, made the call to furlough staff. It was backed by federal health officials who supplied new workers. They declared St Basils fit for purpose and said there was no need to evacuate positive residents. But today, the coroner was told that doctors on the ground warned of disaster.
Did he take notice of the expert opinions of the doctors?
At this juncture, Your Honour, we merely observe that a number of senior Commonwealth public servants in Canberra, none of whom had set foot in St Basils, were making decisions on 21 July 2020 about the residents in the teeth of very clear warnings from doctors.
Once the Commonwealth came in, families say they felt locked out and left in the dark. A group of them, including Christine Golding, went to St Basils to see what was going on, some banging on the windows, desperate to see their loved ones. They were threatened with police.
They should be most shocked that it was allowed to happen, that we allowed it to happen.
The inquest will go for 5 weeks. Danny Tran, ABC News, Melbourne.
Protesters have vowed to keep returning to the steps of state parliament as they rally against the government's proposed pandemic laws. The controversial legislation will begin to be debated by the upper house tomorrow, and there are expected to be significant changes. The government is still negotiating with 3 key crossbenchers, while the opposition will try to move a raft of amendments. Here's state political reporter Bridget Rollison.
Protesters set up camp on the steps of Parliament last night and grew in numbers today.
What is happening in Victoria is too much like a police state.
They vowed to be there all week, angry about the government's proposed pandemic laws, and they're not alone.
This lockdown law gets in the way of our recovery, and it does that by impacting so much on people's peace of mind.
The opposition will attempt to move 18 amendments when the bill comes before the upper house tomorrow, including limiting how long pandemics can be extended for from 3 months to 1 month, removing the ability to make public health orders based on personal attributes like age or gender, and automatically suspending pandemic orders if health advice justifying them isn't provided by the government within 14 days.
None of us have seen that advice. It's never been released.
The Victorian Human Rights Commissioners joined a long list of groups raising concerns about the proposed laws, particularly the ability to make targeted orders based on specific attributes.
The unavoided consequences of things being done quickly is that, you can misinterpret these things, or they could be used differently down the track.
Opposition to the bill has been fierce and at times toxic. Thousands of protesters marched through the CBD on Saturday carrying nooses and placards depicting the Premier as Hitler. Another rally is planned this weekend.
You're entitled to protest if you wish, but ultimately the Parliament will have the final say on the bill.
The ABC understands there are 6 or 7 key issues the three crossbenchers are focusing on in their negotiations with the government, including reducing how long pandemics can be declared for. Those negotiations will continue into tonight and could provide around a dozen amendments to the bill.
We are advocating for improvements based on the submissions that we've received from the community and human rights organisations.
Parliament is expected to sit an extra day on Friday to try to get the laws through before the state of emergency powers expire next month. Bridget Willison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Fully vaccinated travellers from COVID hotspots in Victoria, as well as New South Wales and the ACT, can now apply for a border pass to fly into Queensland to home quarantine. The changes were brought forward after the state passed 70% double vaccination rates of those 16 and over. Under the rules, travellers must be double dosed and have waited 2 weeks since their second vaccination. They must also have received a negative COVID test within 72 hours before travel and be able to home quarantine for 14 days.
Today is the day that you can start putting in place your travel arrangements and start flying back this week.
Queensland is on track to hit its 80% vaccination target in December, when quarantine rules would be dropped for fully vaccinated domestic travellers. Scott Morrison has rejected a claim from his British counterpart, Boris Johnson, that the Glasgow climate talks sounded the death knell for coal-fired power. The Prime Minister says the coal sector is going to provide thousands of Australian jobs for decades to come, a view firmly shared by the Coalition's junior partner, the Nationals. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports from Parliament House.
A lot of Australia's national wealth trundles down these tracks, a point that Barnaby Joyce was making in his own inimitable way.
What you got happening here is our nation earning money. For each one of these that goes through, it's about $1 million.
The Nationals leader putting the coal back in the coalition.
If the world's buying it, there's a market for it. And if they say the world's transitioning away from it, well, you'll see that at the Port of Newcastle, you'll see that at the Port of Gladstone, but it's not happening.
UN climate talks wrapped up on the weekend, with India and China successfully weakening a pledge to phase out coal to a phase down. Despite the last-minute change, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared,
"It is beyond question that Glasgow has sounded the death knell for coal power."
No, I don't believe it did.
One Nationals senator going even further.
It's a big green light for us to build more coal mines, supply the world more coal.
Well, not really. Coal, currently Australia's second biggest export, is expected to halve in value to the economy by mid-century, according to the government's own modelling.
They'll continue to be working in that industry for decades to come, because there will be a transition that will occur over a long period of time.
It is so decided.
The COP26 summit also ended with an expectation that all nations revise and strengthen their 2030 emission reduction targets, although the government says its existing target is fixed.
They've walked away from that commitment that they voluntarily signed up to.
What matters is what you actually achieve. And so we're well above our target.
Labor will reveal its climate policy next month, probably after Parliament's risen for the year. The opposition's still wrestling whether to be bold in its ambition or more modest. The smart money is on the latter, with senior ALP figures keen to deny Scott Morrison a scare campaign, with a federal election only months away. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The mystery of what happened to missing toddler William Tyrrell could be a big step closer to being solved. Detectives are back on the New South Wales mid-north coast, searching specific sites near the home of the child's foster grandparents after discovering new evidence. Police say they are now looking for the boy's remains and hope the operation will bring the investigation to a conclusion.
Detectives are calling it a high-intensity search. Officers arrived in bushland, not far from where William Tyrrell went missing in 2014.
Here.
Police expect to be here for more than 2 weeks, with hundreds of officers involved.
It's highly likely that if we found something, it would be a body. We are looking for the remains of William Tyrrell, there's no doubt about that.
Police say the full-scale operation is a direct response to new evidence, but detectives won't reveal what that is or if someone is helping them. As the search ramped up this afternoon, trees were chopped down and bushland cleared. Police have also brought in sniffer dogs, taking them into dense scrub, as well as digging equipment.
Experts from outside the police force will be assisting us and providing guidance to the police of what they're going to do.
William vanished 7 years ago from his foster grandmother's house. Dressed in a Spider-Man suit, the 3-year-old was last seen playing in the front yard of the property. Over the years, there have been countless searches around Kendall, but police say this new police operation will explore 3 specific sites for the first time.
We're hopeful that it'll take us a degree towards proving an offence or finding out what happened to William Tyrrell.
The coronial inquest into the missing toddler is yet to hand down its finding. Police were again keen to remind the public today there is a $1 million reward for any information leading to a conviction. Louisa Rubo, ABC News, Kendall.
Still to come this hour, real estate agents busted using illegal tricks to boost sale prices.
Yeah, I do feel very tricked. I feel like, they're just putting these low numbers just to reel in a bunch of buyers and then in hope that someone will throw in a massive offer.
It's a grubby tool that estate agents use to encourage more people to attend properties.
Sold! Congratulations. Plus, Laura Tingle looks at the climate change battle lines being drawn for the election. That's coming up.
New data from the National Skills Commission suggests almost 2/3 of regional businesses are struggling to hire workers. Since the pandemic began, it's become harder to recruit workers in the regions than in capital cities.
At McDonald's in Katherine in the Northern Territory, it's drive-through service only during the week as the restaurant tries to recruit up to 70 staff.
It doesn't surprise me to some extent. It's only since COVID that recruitment difficulty has been higher in regional Australia than in the capital cities.
Everybody come sit down on the mat.
Over the NT border in Kununurra in WA's north, accommodation and labour shortages have become so bad a childcare centre has had to cut each family's care by a day a week.
It's a stressful time emotionally and financially for families. It's impacting the businesses and the organisations who they work for, who obviously can't have their staff attending as many days as they're employed for.
In June, a Bureau of Statistics survey found 18% of employers believed pay conditions were making it hard to find staff. But in Kununurra, even paying well above the award hasn't helped.
Our room leaders hold a diploma in education and care. That's a 2-year TAFE course, so full-time, and we pay them $90,000 a year.
Across Australia, some occupations are more in demand than others. In September, the National Skills Commission found 7,900 job ads for registered nurses.
I'm finding that those of us who remain and who have chosen not to leave the industry are a lot more stressed and strained.
There's been talk of a so-called COVID-induced Great Resignation, with millions of Americans quitting their jobs. But so far, the ABS isn't seeing data suggesting it's happening here.
But that may change as the lockdowns and restrictions are lifted across the country.
Instead, the Bureau says employers are putting staffing challenges down to a drop in the number of applicants and the inability of skilled migrants to fly into the country. Eliza Borello, ABC News.
Austria has ordered a lockdown of about 2 million of its unvaccinated citizens to contain surging coronavirus cases. From today, anyone aged 12 and over who's not been immunised will only be allowed to leave home for essential reasons, such as work, grocery, shopping, exercise. Austria has one of the lowest vaccination rates in Western Europe, with only 65% of the population fully vaccinated. Cases there have been rising in recent weeks, with more than 13,000 infections reported in the past 24 hours. Critics have questioned whether the 10-day lockdown is constitutional, but the government says hospitals won't be able to cope if the current outbreak is not brought under control. Poland, Lithuania and Latvia are considering asking NATO to hold emergency talks as they struggle to manage a tense migration standoff on their borders with Belarus. It's a step that's only been requested a few times in the history of the Western Alliance. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports.
A late-night rescue in the freezing cold in a Polish forest. Two brothers from Syria made it across the border from Belarus and walked for 4 days until they collapsed.
We found two men in the woods. They are in a really bad condition. They couldn't communicate with us.
This pregnant woman is suffering from hypothermia.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
She was found with her husband and 5 children by volunteers and border guards.
There were 5 kids among them. Whether you are pro-refugees or against them, I think we all deeply agree that people need some basic humanitarian help.
At the border, thousands are desperate, cold and hungry. They're trapped on the Belarusian side, trying to get into Poland as a gateway to other European countries. Belarus has been accused of enticing migrants from the Middle East and pushing them into Europe. Poland won't allow them in, and the country's Prime Minister is calling on NATO to take concrete steps to resolve the crisis, while the people stuck in the middle try and survive in makeshift camps.
We can't stay more because the weather is too cold. The people maybe day by day will die here from cold.
The EU is about to adopt a new package of sanctions targeting airlines and travel agencies to stop them bringing migrants into Belarus.
Sit down! Sit down!
But for those who've already reached the border, life is getting tougher and there's a long, cold winter ahead. Nick Dole, ABC News.
Queen Elizabeth has missed the Remembrance Sunday service in London for the first time in 22 years after spraining her back. The event was due to be the 95-year-old's first public appearance since she was advised to rest after spending a night in hospital last month. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he saw the Queen last week and she was well.
I just wanted to reassure everybody by saying that I did see the Queen for an audience last week on Wednesday in Windsor, and she's very well. So I just, it shouldn't need saying, but I just wanted to say it anyway.
The Queen served in World War II as an army driver and mechanic and attaches great importance to Remembrance Sunday. It's only the 7th time she's missed the event in her 69 years on the throne. Back home, miners operating in remote and often hostile environments tend to be held up as commercially hard-nosed and hardly idealistic. But Australian mining companies are turning to renewable energy in increasing numbers.
Across Australia's mining industry, the winds of change are blowing. At this gold mine near Leinster, about 1,000 kilometres northeast of Perth, thousands of tonnes of rocks are moved every day. Up until recently, it was a task that was powered almost entirely by diesel. But now up to 85% of the mine's energy needs are being met by renewable sources, including the first wind farm at an Australian resources project.
In optimal conditions, we've been as high as 80–90%.
The hybrid power project at the mine is made up of 5 wind turbines, a solar farm and a 13-megawatt battery, underpinned by a gas-fired generator. Goldfields, The South African company which owns the site says the system has allowed Agnew to not only cut its emissions, but its costs as well.
We're actually paying no more for power than we were under a previous arrangement. In fact, it's slightly reduced.
For engineering firm EDL, which built the Agnew microgrid, the success of such projects should come as no surprise.
With the conditions around here, as you can see, it's very windy, very sunny. They're great conditions for renewables.
With voters, investors and increasingly workers expecting businesses to cut their carbon emissions, EDL says miners around the country are lining up to install renewable energy systems of their own.
The whole world is transitioning from fossil fuels, and the remote energy space is no different.
Mines like Agnew run around the clock, meaning they require uninterrupted power supplies. While renewable energy can meet most of those needs, industry says fossil fuels such as diesel and gas will be required to fill in the gaps for some time yet.
There are limits to how much renewable you can integrate into the grids, but in the future, as the technology gets even more mature, then we can get to 100% renewable.
A green gold rush for the 21st century. Daniel Mercer, ABC News.
Now here's finance with Alan Kohler.
The Australian share index has recovered exactly 3/4 of what it lost in August and September, as fears of inflation and rising interest rates gripped the markets then. Well, inflation hasn't gone away. In fact, if anything, it's become more certain than it was in August. But for the moment, the market is not so worried. Today's big mover was Mesoblast, the stem cell biotech, which jumped nearly 12% after releasing the results of phase 3 trials in New York, showing a 65% reduction in the incidence of heart attacks and strokes. Elsewhere, Wesfarmers and Fortescue were the best of the leaders, while BHP and NAB fell. On commodity markets, the talk was all about increased Chinese coal production pushing prices down, and also that the Biden administration might release oil from its strategic reserves to get the price and therefore inflation in America down. Iron ore and gold went up. The US market went up on Friday, but Asian markets fell today. Now, this is what's called the Warren Buffett valuation indicator for the US share market. It's the value of all American companies as a percentage of GDP. Now, as the pandemic began, it was at the same level as the internet bubble of 2000, the peak of it. Now, Mr. Buffett's mind is blown. The Australian dollar has recovered fairly strongly from Friday's low of 72.7 US cents. And finally, the national average petrol price has come down from last week's peak by about the equivalent of what drips down the side of your car when you pull the pump out. And that's finance.
Australia will host next year's Men's T20 World Cup as the defending champions after beating New Zealand by 8 wickets in Dubai to win the trophy for the first time. Mitch Marsh was unbeaten on 77. David Warner made another significant contribution as Australia reached the victory target with more than an over to spare.
It could be argued that some victories have tasted sweeter. But there was no questioning the quality of Australia's performance in the final. A switch hit and a change in the narrative when it came to a proud cricketing nation in this event.
And they've finally got their hands on a men's T20 World Cup trophy.
It's awesome. There's been so much talk about this being the one that's been elusive to Australia. This team's pretty special. The camaraderie, the way that everyone really cares for each other.
We actually love each other. It is beautiful.
A player who hasn't always felt the love from outside the change room is all-rounder Mitch Marsh.
Yeah, most of Australia hate me. Hopefully I'll win them over one day.
Quick bowling. That day came in the final. Intent was signalled from the first ball he faced.
What a start that is.
Marsh hit 3 more sixes in a brutal display.
What a game-changing half-century this is.
Hopefully Australians are proud of me.
David Warner was named Player of the Tournament less than 2 months after being dropped by his IPL team.
I can't believe that people wrote him off a couple of weeks ago saying that he was done. That's when he plays his best cricket, so it was almost like poking the bear.
After losing the toss on a ground where teams batting second have been winning, captain Kane Williamson's 85 was in vain as the Black Caps lost their 3rd World Cup final since 2015.
Australia played really, really well and you can hear them celebrating next door.
Few would have savoured the win more than coach Justin Langer, whose position had been under scrutiny in the months leading up to the tournament.
Yeah, he's been great. The vibe around the group has been unbelievable.
It's important to have fun and enjoy it, right? And the guys have done that. And I think that was a really important part of our success here.
A team clearly singing from the same song sheet. Both the men's and women's teams are the T20 World Champions, and Finch's side will defend its title on home turf next year. The more immediate challenge is the Ashes, where Australia will be looking to tap into the winning spirit of the white ball squad. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
Australian motorcyclist Remy Gardner has followed in his father's famous footsteps to win a world title overnight. The 23-year-old son of 1987 world champion Wayne Gardner finished 10th in Valencia, but it was enough to take the 2021 Moto2 championship. The two are only the second father and son duo to both win world motorcycle racing crowns, after Americans Kenny Roberts, Sr. and Jr. Teammates of Liam Jones have expressed their shock and sadness at the retirement of the Carlton defender. Jones announced yesterday his departure from the Blues, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. The 30-year-old has reportedly resisted getting a coronavirus vaccine that's mandated by the league.
I've loved playing with Jonesy, and he's made such a great contribution in his footy club, and it's going to be sad to not be running alongside with him.
Jonesy had done so much for the club and was such a good player for such a long time, and everyone respects him so highly.
Jones had reinvented himself as a defender, and finding a replacement could prove difficult for new coach Michael Voss. Today was the final day for young Victorian footballers to impress talent recruiters ahead of next week's AFL draft. Opportunities for aspiring footballers have been scarce, with the pandemic once again playing havoc with the 2021 season.
In wet and grey conditions, Victoria's brightest footballing prospects put their skills to the test.
It's your whole life work, so to have this moment to new chapter of your life.
While clubs have mostly made their minds up, recruiters still scrutinise the teenagers' movements. So too a heavy media presence. Answering questions from the press can be daunting at the best of times.
Watch out. Watch out. You might need someone to stand behind him.
The dreams of these players could be realised on draft day next week. But it's been far from easy for this year's draft crop.
Obviously towards the end of the year, it was a little bit frustrating. Not being able to play, but I think just happy to be back.
A pretty challenging year, not just for me, but for everyone else. So I guess to get to the point where we're all training together, about 30 of us, it's a real relief, really.
The training session is fairly casual, and perhaps the most crucial feature is the medical examination, which is done away from the cameras.
Today's a bit about just making sure they're medically healthy. It's all about that, which we didn't have the chance to do with the Metro boys.
Some players have even grown.
Yeah, we got measured today. I think I was grown another couple of centimetres, since the start of the year.
The draft will take place across Wednesday and Thursday next week. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
Now with the weather, here's Nate Byrne to tell us when we're getting some warm weather.
Lucky you get to sleep in, Mary. Evening. It has been absolutely freezing, and this morning Victoria forgot that we're just 2 weeks out from summer. Minimums plunged and the snow fell. -4 recorded both at Bulla and Falls Creek, where Chris Hocking took this photo this morning. Says they woke up to 20 centimetres of the white stuff. Even closer to sea level, though, it was very chilly this morning. The vast majority of the state solidly in single digits, and the daytime temperatures didn't fare all that much better. The mountaintops stayed below freezing, and even parts of the Mallee only just made it into the 20s. Around the city, mostly it stayed in the low teens, though the airport reached 15.5 just after 4 p.m. Isolated showers accompanied the chill. That was also felt through the rest of the southeastern capitals today, all thanks to the cold front that came through yesterday, sweeping some very chilly air from deep in the Southern Ocean. But there's a high that's keeping most of the country fairly settled at the moment, and that's going to move over us from tomorrow, helping to clear the skies, at least for the next couple of days. So we're on a drying trend, and it's only really a trough in Queensland that's generating any decent falls tomorrow. Around the country, as the temperatures slowly recover in the southeast, the north is going to swelter. We could be looking at record temperatures for this time of year in the Territory, while this morning, Tassie may be record cold. There's a dry air mass up top backdrop that's helping keep things uncomfortable up there. For us, though, tomorrow the settled conditions will extend across the state from the west. Mostly a dry Tuesday after maybe a very early shower. A touch of warmth returning as well, while in the east there's a little bit more to come for the gauges, but it's fairly isolated shower activity. On the bays, the wind is continuing to ease as well. The southerlies will stay fresh until turning southwards during the afternoon, then they'll back off some. Riverine flooding continues as well from the weekend. Now, we're all at minor flood level, so good news there, and most of those likely to be finalised tomorrow as the waters continue to recede. So, the next few days, let's start with tomorrow. The city's divided. One side of the bay, mostly dry. On the east, some morning showers, but that'll mostly clear after lunch. And once it does, the city should feel just a little bit warmer tomorrow. We're aiming for a top of 16 degrees, probably nothing significant for the gauges. In fact, it's a trend that's going to continue for at least a couple of days. Temperatures getting back into the 20s from midweek for a warmer Thursday, Mary, and then more wet weather.
Thanks very much for that, Nate. Lee Sales is next with 7:30.